So before we get into the nitty-gritty of Simpro and really start exploring the finer details, I feel like it's really important to frame the hierarchy of the software and how it actually functions and works, so that when we actually get into the workflows, or even if you're a current user now and you're using workflows and just want to understand how information feeds forward into the software and how it feeds forward into workflows, then this is going to be a really useful thing to learn. Now, in Simpro, you've basically got a hierarchy, and that hierarchy goes as follows. You've got system setup, which is the configuration, the system settings in the background, and then that's overridden by things like, for example, a customer record, where you might have a specific rate or price for carrying out a specific type of work or providing a particular type of labor for that work. You can then override it at the point of workflow. So by workflow, I mean inside a quote or a job, and bill them a different amount to the standard rate that you've got in setup and the standard rate that you've got against their record. So there's basically those three main levels. And those three main levels are important to understand, because when you do get to the point of building a quote or a job, you're going to want to know how it's made up and how it's put together. So let's quickly have a look at what that looks like. Now, if we go into the cog in the top right-hand corner, we can see we've got system setup. Now, don't worry if you don't have access to that. It's not meant to be accessed by everybody. It's for the people who maintain, manage, and administer, so the system administrators for your particular Simpro build. But for the purposes of this, we're going to have a look, and we're going to go into labor rates, and in here we can see that my default labor rate is labor, and it's ticked as a default over on the right-hand side there. And I've also got a rate down here that I'd like to point out called senior engineer. And that senior engineer rate is £70. Right, so what I want to do now is go into a customer record, and the customer record that we're going to use in this example is NGF. So let's go into that record, and we're going to go to the rates tab and labor rates tab. So you can see a very similar list to the one that we saw in system setup. But what we're doing in here is we're setting our labor rates bespoke for this client to override the first level, the system setup level. So whenever we do work for NGFM, we can see that our default is selected as senior engineer, and rather than the rate that we have in system setup, it's a slightly increased rate to £80. Now, whenever we have a quote or a job, if I just click on this quote that I prepared earlier, bit of a Blue Peter moment there for you, Blue Peter, and then go to parts and labor, you can see that in this particular quote, it started off with the senior engineer rate being £80 an hour. However, I've overridden it to 120. If I want to revert it back to the default in the system, and remember, it won't go to the default in the system for system setup because NGFM is the customer for this quote and that's overridden the rate, it reverts back to the 80. However, I can change it to whatever I want in here and put whatever rate and whatever price in that I want it to be for this particular quote or particular job or whatever you're working on. So that should give you a really good idea of the foundation, the building blocks of the system and the system hierarchy and how one price can be overridden by another. And this kind of behavior in the system isn't just for rates, it's for other elements as well, which we'll explore throughout this course. So let's move on to the next section.